Hello and welcome from me, David Foster. Now, you may think you look good in what you're wearing, but are you really thinking at all about how the clothes were made, whether workers were exploited, if there was child labour? Time to look at why fashion is failing. This is Roundtable. You know, it is a worldwide problem, but in the UK, one retailer with a turnover of more than $1 billion has been exposed as paying what have been described as slave wages. What's it going to take to get this dirty laundry sorted?
The coronavirus pandemic has shone a light on the treatment of workers, mainly women who produce fast fashion for well-known brands. Garment workers around the world often experience low wages and exploitation, an issue that predates the outbreak. But COVID-19 has created fresh injustices. Workers in countries like Bangladesh, Cambodia and Vietnam have faced destitution and starvation after big-name fashion retailers cancelled $25 billion in orders. In the UK city of Leicester, where exploitation has been known about for years, coronavirus has refocused attention on garment workers forced to work throughout lockdown despite high levels of infection. An investigation by British newspaper The Sunday Times found textile workers producing clothes for fashion brand Boohoo and were being paid as little as $4.30 an hour, less than half the UK's legal minimum wage. COVID-19 has shown us that our world is as interconnected as the garment supply chains that crisscross the globe. Is it time for retailers and customers to think again about the true cost of cheap clothing?
Now, let us welcome to the programme Orsola De Castro, co-founder and global creative director of Fashion Revolution. Rubana Huq is with us, president of Bangladesh's Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and Tansy Hoskins with us too, author of Stitched Up and Footwork and journalist covering the fashion industry. Great to have all three of you with us. Rubana, let me ask you, you represent the manufacturers and the exporters. Is there still exploitation of the workers in garment factories in Bangladesh?
I think I need to give you a rundown of what garment factories in Bangladesh look like. I think we're probably now the most compliant sourcing hub of the world, because we have not only gone through structural, fire, and electrical remediation, we've also gone through a lot of social compliance, and we have everything charted out now. So we rather hear about Westerners exploiting labor these days rather than us. So I think Asia is in a better place, and we've learned our lesson, and I think we have come out of it much stronger. As a result, we have set wages and we have compliance absolutely there. So, of course, there are exceptions all over the world, but an exception or an isolated incident does not define the industry in general.
I'm thinking about an article I read which suggested that yes, there had been massive changes, but that Bangladesh wanted to get rid of the international monitoring, bring the system back under its own control, and that would effectively be the control of the manufacturers and the exporters, many of whom sit in parliament and pass these laws.
Not true at all, because instead of Accord and Alliance, who've actually left already, we have done a unique thing. It's a national initiative, but we have brands, international and national trade unions, and industry on board, and we've formed Ready-Made Garment Sustainability Council. So it's RMG Sustainability Council, RSC in short. And in there, you'd be happy to hear that there are 6 brand representatives, 6 trade unions, and only 6 from industry. So it is a very just platform, and we've just started it. And we're very happy that we have not changed any of the protocols that were existing. It's just that there's an insertion of the national context, and there's no backsliding whatsoever. So I must bring it to your attention that what you hear is probably not correct.
Okay, let me ask Tansy. I mean, you cover the fashion industry. Do you believe that Bangladesh's garment business, which is so important for the country, is a reformed model?
I mean, no, I mean, of course I don't. And I mean, obviously, I'm not in any way, shape, or form a Bangladeshi garment worker, but I am in constant contact with trade unions and workers' rights groups in Bangladesh. And I think it's important to get a reality check. I mean, the wage for garment workers in Bangladesh is about 8,000 taka, which is about £75. We're seeing the most important factory auditing system, the Accord, being taken over by something that it's really not clear whether the inspections will continue at the same standard or whether we will again see disasters like the Tazreen factory fire and of course the Rana Plaza factory collapse. And also there is ongoing, really severe persecution of Bangladeshi garment workers and of trade unionists when they try and stand up for their basic rights. Very recently, we've had garment workers killed, shot dead on the streets during demonstrations. There are Bangladeshi garment worker trade unionists who are undergoing trial. We get people being sacked all the time just for standing up for themselves. So no, I don't think that that it's in any way true that Bangladesh has a good model at the moment. It's not something that anybody else should be following.
And Rubana, I will come back to you and allow you to respond to that, but let's bring in Ursula at this moment. The suggestion was from Rubana, among other things, that it was the global north, the Western countries that now needed to look to their own models because they were the ones exploiting garment workers.
Well, the model is certainly ours. I mean, the model has certainly been exported from here over to what were then the developing country that are now the producing country. I actually would like to say that anything that relates to the fashion supply chain right now is by nature exploitative, both of the environment and of people, and that we have so many cultural issues and systemic issues that need to be changed before we can really look at an industry that will, evolve positively. I mean, the reality is that wherever, whether it be in Bangladesh, in Cambodia, in China, in Italy, or in the UK, wherever you have a system that exploits humans, we're no longer equal. We're not equal, and therefore we're not equally invested to make those changes. So
what is the exploitation as regards to Bangladesh? You mentioned other countries as well, but we only have a representative from Bangladesh here, and I'll get Rubana to respond to this. What is the exploitation that you perhaps see there?
Well, I mean, it's the exploitation that everyone can see there. We're looking at wages that aren't adequate. And at Fashion Revolution, we call for all garment workers and all supply chain workers to be allowed to unionize. The minute that unionization is threatened or put in peril, then we know that exploitation will be rife. I mean, we know that the transparency in the fashion industry supply chain is lacking completely. We have little public disclosure as well. So it's very difficult to actually have a culture of scrutiny and vigilance, which is what, transparency can begin. It can allow organizations on the ground to have more clarity on where the brands are operating and what is actually going on. And this is globally. I mean, we've just seen it in the UK. What lack of transparency.
And we will come to that if we may, but I do want to bring Rubana back in at this point because there's quite a number of different issues that have been raised there. No transparency, problems with unionization, low wages. Rubana, what do you say?
To start with, let me just go back to Tansy's argument on Accord's function being taken away. I don't think enough is known about what's happening. We were in a 1.5 hour long conversation of RSC with the Accord Foundation, very much on board. And there's an industrial and ITUC, both of them are actually working with us, and we are continuing with inspections as it was before. Nothing has changed in Accord Bangladesh office except the name change because we've kept all the engineers. The protocols are all in place. So, it's just not worth talking about a thing which is already in process. So I request Tansy to actually talk to her colleagues of industrial and ITUC, and they can probably brief her better on what's happening because they're very much
let me put this to you, Rubana. There are thousands of factories that don't come under this accord. They are subcontractors. They don't supply Western
No,
brands, and
that's
they're
not
not
true
held
anymore.
to account
That's not true
to the
anymore
same
because
standard.
currently we have only 1,926 factories which are operating. And out of that, only 1,354 are direct exporters. So many
I'm
of the
talking about
factories that were
subcontractors,
before
not
are
necessarily
not
the
there
factories
anymore.
themselves.
They've closed down. So the
So
number
it's
of
all done
factories
directly by the manufacturer, and none of it is done by an outside agency supplying them, an outside agency
it's
that
not
perhaps cannot
possible
be monitored.
anymore. It is not possible to be subcontracting to unauthorized units anymore because compliance is very tough. So out of those, I mean, we also have national action plan, which basically has been running slow. But what we have done in RSC is we've also taken up a project along with ILO, and it's absolutely to bring all the national action plan factories into RSC so that we can have a joint monitoring. So that's what the government is aiming, and that's what ILO is aiming, and that's what RSA is aiming. So we want to be all inclusive because it's not about just the big factories. It's actually about the transparency of the entire supply chain. And also, we need to also understand instead of, when we talk about exploitation, and I kind of give Ursula her kudos for saying that, West has exported exploitation. Look at what the brands have done to us. I mean, nobody now has the moral right to tell us that we don't pay our workers enough. Look at the way the brands have left us in the lurch, not paid, and deferred payments and canceled. Where is everybody's voice? So
We
my
will get on
point
to
is,
the
let's not
cancellation.
talk about exploitation at this point of Asian manufacturers. Let's talk about
Let's
the
get
brand
on to the
exploitation that happens.
cancelled contracts, partly because of coronavirus, in just a moment. But let me come to you, Tansy, and you, Ursula. Perhaps Tansy first. I'm going to read you something from Priti Patel in reference to the boohoo contracts with the Leicester garment workers who were being paid a pittance, less than half the national wage, described as slave wages. This is what the Home Secretary had to say. Let this be a warning to those who are exploiting people in sweatshops like these for their own commercial gain. This is just the start. What you are doing is illegal. It will not be tolerated, and we are coming after you. Noble sentiments. But my question when I saw that and saw the story in the newspapers was, why is it being allowed to happen in the UK?
Well, I mean, this is a very old story, unfortunately. I mean, I first wrote about Leicester sweatshops 5 years ago, and Dispatches, the first 3-month undercover documentary that they made was in 2010. So the unfortunate truth is that exploitation in Leicester has been part and parcel of this Conservative government, and it's been part and parcel of austerity and their approach, which has been to cut.
To be fair, I was covering stories about sweatshops. It happened to be in Birmingham more than 30 years ago. This is not a product of the austerity measures put in place by the government, surely.
Well, it is. I mean, it is because it's, I mean, what you need to deal with factory exploitation is an inspectorate that has teeth. And what we've seen under the Conservative government has been the running down of the health and safety in this country and of the inspectorate. And what we've also seen, and what was in that Dispatches back in 2010, one of the main brands that they found was Arcadia, which is obviously owned by our own homegrown billionaire Philip Green. But rather than holding these kinds of people to account, what the British government did was appoint Philip Green as a special advisor to the government. So there's been just a complete distortion of the values of this country. It's not been about keeping people safe. It's been about maximizing profit for a small number of corporations. And we've seen what the result is now. People being paid £3.50 an hour to work in these incredibly dangerous conditions right here in our own country.
Ursula, you sort of operate if you like, tell me if I'm wrong here, like a fair trade in terms of fashion. You try and advise people what to buy, try and advise people how to sell it, to bring it in, etc., etc. Were you surprised? Tansy clearly wasn't, at the story about what happened in Leicester and presumably elsewhere as well.
No, no, I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, I'd go back further to the history of fashion, and I would say that this is an industry that designed itself in order to exploit the minute it became industrialized. I mean, cotton was produced by enslaved people in the American South. It was then woven in Victorian sweatshop and sold throughout the world via the East India Company. I mean, show me where there is no exploitation in that process. And, the truth is that
Well, Rukana says it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, I don't know about that. As I said, I wouldn't be able to vouch for that because I've not been in Bangladesh and I've not inspected some of my colleagues at Fashion Revolution have, but I wouldn't be able to want to comment. But what I do want to comment on is that we can't imagine that we will continue as the West to create the solutions and imagine that they will fit other countries. I mean, this is the first attitude that's wrong with this industry. It's patronizing and it's it's condescending. Actually, it is true that some of the most exciting innovation I have certainly seen in other fields, not necessarily just social justice, come from the producing countries. So, we need to understand that the minute we exported, to a certain extent, a wonderful craft, but, exported it precisely because we didn't want to have any of the responsibility relating to that production, as I said, human or environmental, we also somehow lost a skill from our shores and let it develop elsewhere. So I do believe strongly that now the solutions for sustainability are not in our hands. We hardly have a production, and the productions that we have, it's either just as exploitative as anything we've ever seen, because I've seen terrible sweatshops in Italy as well, to be honest with you, and I know of the existence of unfathomable conditions in Eastern Europe, for instance. So, who are we to say what the solution is when our
let me come to that in just a moment, whether it's changing people's minds by them as purchasers naming and shaming the brands, etc., or if it's something else. But Rubana, let me come back to you. I'm going to give you some figures from the International Labour Organization. The first one's very encouraging. It said that child labour has fallen by 30% between 2000 and 2012, but that there are still 170 million child labourers worldwide, many in textiles and garments. And there was an NGO report that was included in this document that on southern India, spinning mills there, that found that young girls are working under appalling conditions that amount to modern day slavery and the worst forms of child labour. That is southern India. We've had Italy mentioned, we've had the UK mentioned, we've had Eastern Europe mentioned. What I want to ask you is, as somebody who is adamant that practices have changed in Bangladesh, are you aware of changes elsewhere? Is there pressure to change things elsewhere? What is being done on an international basis? What do your colleagues in similar positions as you say?
Internationally, I think I couldn't agree with Ursula more on one point, and I think the discourse on exploitation has existed for a long time, and it's the same all over the world. I mean, right after the brand started canceling, we realized and we woke up to a new day where we literally had many vulnerable workers. So for us as an industry, we depend on our workers.
There were cancellations because of the COVID crisis or something else?
COVID crisis, yes. And also, Arcadia was mentioned. Edinburgh woolen mills, for one, just refused to communicate with suppliers. And these manufacturers who depended on these contracts would have actually been dead if it was not for the government giving us soft loans for 3 months' salary. Because all these big brands took advantage of COVID and restructured themselves. And they understood they needed physical spaces to shrink. They wanted to reorganize, restructure their businesses. And that's exactly what they did. So
Tansy, is that a fair point? That it's all very well to point the finger at the manufacturers, but in fact it is the retailers who are as much to blame for putting these vulnerable people in places such as Bangladesh in economic jeopardy.
Yes, I mean, of course. So ultimately the power behind the throne in the fashion industry is the very big brands and retailers, typically operating out of North America and Europe. So yes, that's where the power comes from. That's who we have to hold accountable. But I think it would be a bit disingenuous to pretend that there wasn't exploitation by factory owners of factory workers. And I think Rubana is in a position of extreme power in Bangladesh to make things better for the workers. And I think one of the big dangers at the moment, and something that is increasingly happening, is that there are calls for things like the minimum wage and minimum health and safety standards to be rolled back. And we are seeing that from business, backed up by industry and by lobby groups like the BGMEA. And we just need to make sure that that doesn't happen, because at the end of the day, the most vulnerable people in the supply chains are the workers. They're the workers who died at Rana Plaza. They're the workers who are currently starving at the moment because of the COVID-19 crisis. And so I think we all need to work. We all need to work together to make sure that brands pay up and people don't starve.
Ursula, this one is for you. In terms of what the public can do, and it was partly because of public pressure here, do you think saying you won't buy something would make very much of a difference? Is there any way to identify whether you are buying the correct thing morally from your standpoint? What can the consumer do to get better informed and put pressure on?
Well, I don't personally believe in boycotting because, we know that there are, ramifications when a brand is boycotted. But above all, we know that brands already factor it in, that they're very aware of the concept of boycott. So choice is more important. And really exercising one's power. There are several ways that citizens can take action, and it would be wrong to generalize and say that there is one thing that everyone can do. We can all take steps to do things that we can continue to do consistently. Some of us will take to mending and making our clothes last a long time. Others will be much more discerning in the way that they buy. Fundamental is time and knowledge. These are very complex issues, and we can't just read the headlines.
The problem is that boycotting, as you say, doesn't necessarily work, and making choices where you source your materials from somewhere other than Bangladesh doesn't necessarily work, and could actually endanger the workforce even more because they wouldn't have work to do.
I don't think so. I think that if brands were determined to have, a well-paid workforce, there would be very easy ways to make the whole mathematical subject work. I mean, I'm not an economist, but I do know that garment workers are largely paid by the piece rather than by the hour. This in itself encourages an enormous amount of waste and leaves skills pretty dead, because if all you're doing is sewing the seam to a pair of trousers or a t-shirt, you're not going to improve in your in your skills, and that will be your life, sewing the same thing forever and ever again and making as many as you possibly can, therefore making mistakes and creating waste.
Let me go back to Rubana and ask you this. Do you think garment workers in Bangladesh are paid a fair wage?
I don't think Bangladeshi manufacturers get paid a fair price by the brands. And Bangladesh's living standards are.
That wasn't the question, though, was it?
So I'm continuing. So the point is, in Bangladesh, we have literally increased wages by 250 times in the last 5 years. And now at a point when we talk about 8,000 taka, 8,000 taka is not for the workers, actually. It's just for the entry level. And that changes. And also, I mean, the take-home average is not less than $110 for every worker. And today, Bangladesh pays $423 million a month as wage. So that's substantial wage. Now, if you talk about fairness, it's a relative concept. And I cannot agree more with Ursula and also Tansy on one point, and that is we must stop being unfair, all of us together, from wherever we are. So,
Tansy, let me ask you this as we wind the program up. What do you think can be done, should be done if there is exploitation? Can it be ended?
Yes, the billionaires at the top of the fashion industry need to pay up. They need to pay up during COVID-19 for what they owe, and they need to stop like putting such short time limits on contracts, and they need to stop threatening factories that if they don't give them a lower price, they'll go next door to the next factory or the next country.
And are we therefore going to have to pay more, as Rubana suggests?
Well, I mean, the proportion of a garment, the amount that you pay for a garment that goes to wages is as low as between like 3 and 5%. So even if you doubled workers' wages, it's not. That's not the problem. The wages is not the problem. The problem is the brands expecting to cream off billions and billions in profits every year to beat their competitors. That's where the problem is in this system. It's not with the wages.
And I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for taking part in this discussion. It's been fascinating for me. Appreciate you sparing the time to be with us, and appreciate the time that you, wherever you're watching this, have given us for this edition of Roundtable. For me, David Foster, it's goodbye for now. Hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye.